So the other thing we have to talk about that was pretty gnarly that happened in San Luis Obispo. San Luis Obispo is the college town to the north of Santa Maria. It's the county seat of San Luis Obispo County. I'm in northern Santa Barbara County. And there was a shootout with the SLO PD and a suspect, a guy. They were serving a search warrant at his house. And 2 officers were shot and 1 was killed. So the San Luis Obispo Police Department has identified the officer who was killed in the line of duty Monday, as well as the man suspected of killing him. This was, like I said, earlier this week on Monday. The police department says Detective Luca Benedetti was the officer shot and killed Monday evening while serving a search warrant at a San Luis Obispo apartment. Benedetti was a 12-year law enforcement veteran, the police department said. Detective Steve Orozco was also injured in the shooting and was transported to the hospital where he was treated and released. He is expected to make a full recovery. So these are 2 officers. Benedetti was killed. Has two children and a wife who are left now, without him. That's terrible. I think that's really sad and awful. The suspected shooter was identified as Edward Zamora Giron, 37, who was found dead following the incident. So the PD are saying it looks like they shot him, but then he turned his gun on himself to ultimately, fire the fatal shot that killed him. We're talking about Giron. So the officers were fired upon while serving a search warrant at an apartment, Camella Court off Margarita Avenue Monday evening. They said 6 officers were at the apartment as part of an investigation to a string of late-night burglaries. Officer approached the apartment, identified himself as law enforcement as required by law, the police department said. So they didn't do this. Was not a no-knock warrant. They knocked, and they're apparently met with gunfire. Quote, Giron was laying in wait and began to fire shots at the officers from inside the apartment. And he had an arrest record, no violence, but was alcohol-related stuff that was actually kind of removed from his record. They were all misdemeanors. But there's this other story in the Tribune. I use an incognito to get around the paywall, guys. That's a little trick if you didn't know. But we've learned more about him, and I actually had somebody reach out to me on Instagram to mention that Giron, the shooter, who is now dead as well as the police officer, that he was dealing with mental illness. And so, this is just rough. The both sides of this thing are I mean, I'll get to that. I'll get to the editorial stuff, but let's just read some of the story. This is a really good story by Matt Fountain. Guys, I cannot talk up Matt Fountain, reporter at the San Luis Obispo Tribune, anymore. He used to work for the same media company as I. He worked for the New Times and SLO, which also owns The Sun, where I was in Santa Maria, and just a great reporter. He tracked down a lot and did a lot of really good work that I did reporting on as well, and I shared his work as well about the SLO PD and the SLO CHP being dishonest, frankly, about Black Lives Matter activists over the summer last year. So he did a bunch about the shooting and the officer who passed away, or who was killed, Benedetti. But this story is a bit more about Giron. So the man who killed a San Luis Obispo police detective and wounded another before reportedly taking his own life had sunk deeper into pre-existing mental illness during the COVID-19 pandemic after losing his job at the Pad climbing gym, his friends said Thursday. So they were searching They were serving the search warrant because Giron was suspected of burglarizing the Pad, which is a rock climbing gym. I looked at the guy's Instagram. I'm not going to share it here. I don't feel we need to snoop on the guy or anything like that. But he was into rock climbing, and he worked there, but he was let go, as this story kind of details. Let's see. He was the main suspect when they went to search, and I believe So they talked to a few of his friends. I just don't want to go over stuff I already said. The gym CEO told the Tribune on Monday before the shooting that she believed the business lost up to $20,000 in equipment, including climbing ropes, harnesses, computers, other stuff. CEO Kristen Horowitz said on Monday that the burglary was potentially committed by a disgruntled former employee or someone with knowledge of how the gym is run. Asked about Giron on Tuesday, Chief Operating Officer Jessica Mitchell said the pad climbing gym would not be commenting further at this time. So SLO County Sheriff offered few details. That's Ian Parkinson. Go look in my videos. I've done a couple things about Parkinson. Let's see. He had 3 misdemeanor cases, but they've been purged from public records. And according to the sheriff, he had no mental health, any record of mental illness. I mean, not a criminal record, we should keep in mind. And I have some stuff to share that my experiences with people I know who've been in mental health crises and dealing with law enforcement after this. So let's see. So this is Giron with some of his friends, and they were into rock climbing. Friend describes mental health spiral during pandemic. A close friend of Giron's told the Tribune on Tuesday that he was, quote, one of the kindest people she's ever known, and the shooting was a tragedy. Let's see. She said, I've never seen him be violent toward me or any of my friends ever. When it was clear he was suffering from mental illness, he was always so compassionate, so present, and a great friend. I never felt unsafe around him. There's more from somebody else. Let's see here. This is a big story. And again, Matt Fountain does good work. So let's see. Delavari said she's just as saddened by the death of a peace officer. She feels compelled to speak up about her friend, who she said, quote, shouldn't be labeled as just a criminal, as if he wasn't someone who was struggling deeply and didn't have people who cared about him. His story is all the more relevant during May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, she said. And she hopes city residents will, quote, act with empathy and act with grace. There were 2 lives lost, and I really just think it could have been avoided, Delavari said. Friend asked, where did our Eddie go? Let's see. The shooting of the 2 officers bring back echoes. I did reporting about this too. The shooting of 2 officers brings back echoes of last summer's manhunt for Mason Lira, a 26-year-old Monterey County man killed after wounding 4 local enforcement officers over 2 days in June. Yeah, this guy ambushed Paso Robles Police and SLO County Sheriffs. And Ian Parkinson, during a press conference, linked it to Black Lives Matter when really Lira, here's from the story, was diagnosed with schizophrenia and other mental illnesses that, when untreated, manifested in increasingly bizarre social media activity, homelessness, and minor contacts with law enforcement before a high-profile crisis. So that was a whole thing. Go back to my previous videos for that. Kevin Foote, a Santa Maria teacher who knew Giron from the gym and numerous climbing trips since roughly 2013, said Tuesday that he and other friends had grown alarmed at recent changes in Giron's behavior. Angry outbursts were off-putting. Social media activity grew increasingly odd. Quote, I'd say, where did he go? Where did our Eddie go? Foote said of conversations with their shared group of friends. After hearing that Giron had at least one run-in with law enforcement in the past, those friends tried in vain to reach out to him, offer help. So this is part of what police reform and police, activists concerned about police violence have talked about, which is the need for police funding to be diverted to mental health, crisis intervention, counseling, resources, for people who are in crisis. I mean, not only that, I think we need a widespread social safety net that that includes social workers and mental health officials or mental health professionals, but also just things that meet people's basic needs. This guy lost his job during the pandemic. I don't know. Joey in the comments is making a point. Police are also a victim of over-policing. Exactly. So, they were sent to serve this warrant on this guy who maybe wouldn't have stolen anything if he'd had some kind of aid or intervention, that didn't involve police, right? That could have been, all of that. Here's more from Kevin Foote, who's actually is a local teacher. I know him. He's full disclosure, a member of SLO DSA, as am I. Quote, "That's one of the many sad aspects of this. By the time anyone who knew him had heard that he was arrested, he was already lost from our circle," Foote said. "People tried to help him, but he was not reciprocating that act." Foote told the Tribune he's not defending Giron's actions. Quote, "He took a father's life, a husband's life," Foote said, but he said he doesn't want to see either man's life used as political fodder, which he said he's seen enough of on social media. Quote, "Police are not AMFTs, American Marriage and Family Therapists. They're not social services. They are keepers of the peace. They unfortunately have to execute search warrants and be in the line of fire," he said. "We need society to step up. Friends and police can't carry the load. That requires professionals." He added, "I just mourn that sweet, loyal, funny man who was buried under his own mental illness." And I mourn the police officer. I know it's not popular to say in lefty circles, but a lot of police officers are just working class people. They don't come from tons of money, and they get the job because it is a better paying job you can get without tons of expensive education. And and it offers good retirement. It's one of the few sectors of our government that is still fully supported, fully unionized, gets good pensions, all of that stuff. So Evil Yoda says, "I blame the system." There's all these different layers to this onion. Frankly, with where mental illness is concerned, I have a close friend who went through mental health crisis more than a year ago, and erratic behavior that escalated over time to the point that he just disappeared for days at a time. And anytime we would contact law enforcement for help, it was made clear, like, okay, well, we've filed a missing persons report, person in crisis, so we'll be on the lookout or whatever, send out that kind of alert. But they also said, like, there's nothing we can do unless this person commits a crime, which happened. My friend ended up lashing out at somebody, didn't kill anybody, didn't seriously injure anybody, but that was what happened. And because our society doesn't take mental health or just healthcare in general. We don't even have a healthcare system. We have a healthcare industry, and folks with mental illness who can't hold down a job because of progressive problems with their mental health that don't get addressed because they can't access basic healthcare. They're not profitable to treat. My friend was, held on a psychiatric hold, and they bounced him as soon as they could. Right. And, it was only after other things happened that he was connected with county public health services, the limited public health services that we do have. And they were able to help him with very much necessary pharmaceutical intervention. And his condition improved. But it was just, there was this matter-of-fact attitude from law enforcement where they were like, there's nothing we can really do for him, us as law enforcement. That we can only manage him once he commits crimes. And I can only imagine, my friend could have advanced on the police with something in his hand. That could have happened. And I just shudder to think what might have ended up, what could have happened to him. And so, this stuff, it affects people all over the country, and I think wasn't there a story in, I believe, the Washington Post today about police killing children going through mental health crises. Here it is. I had it saved for this story. It's this is dark stuff, but it just makes it so clear what we need to do to make things better in our society. And people just don't do, there's the political will. It's considered so unreachable, so unattainable. Here is in the Washington Post: police shootings of children spark new outcry, calls for training to deal with adolescents in crisis. How about training for just people in crisis? How about people who are actually trained to deal with people in crisis, not treating every situation like it calls for a gun. The Washington Post database of fatal force incidents finds most children shot by police are minorities and less likely to be armed than adults shot by police. This is, oh my God. Stavion Rodriguez squeezed his 15-year-old body through the drive-through window of the Oki Gas Express convenience store, poking his hands out first so police could see they were empty. He jumped to the ground, holding his hands in the air, then lifted his shirt to reveal the gun tucked in his front waistband. Using the tips of his thumb and index finger, Rodriguez gently pinched the end of the barrel far from the trigger and dropped the weapon to the ground. As the gun hit the pavement, Rodriguez reached for his rear pocket. A volley of bullets burst out and the teenager sank to the ground, surveillance and camera footage show. Dozens of Oklahoma City police officers had responded last November to the 911 call at the convenience store where Rodriguez was a robbery suspect. 5 of them shot 13 bullets into the teen from his head to his feet. He is one of 112 children who have been fatally shot by the police between January 1st, 2015 and Monday, according to a Washington Post database that tracks fatal police shootings. Over the same period of time, 6,168 adults were shot by police. Keep in mind that, our frickin' a newspaper has to keep a database of police shootings because our government will not. Because, and I mean, that's a whole other situation. Quote, I knew he was a child. They were joking about whether he was in there calling his mom, said Cameo Holland, Rodriguez's mother, they knew he was a child, referring to conversations recorded on officers' body cameras. No one was asking, how do we tactically approach this so no one dies today? The 5 officers who fired lethal shots into Holland's child are now facing first-degree manslaughter charges. This is a rare response by prosecutors who tend to side with police investigators who routinely clear officers of wrongdoing. Prosecutors must also weigh whether they can persuade jurors who tend to trust police more than other witnesses. The department said the officers shot because they perceived a threat, and the officers' attorneys said the shooting was justified. So this is, obviously that kid had a gun and all of these other things, but just the fact of there have been multiple stories of children with mental health issues, some children who are neurotypical, right? Atypical, like on the autism spectrum, who get shot and to death by the police. I mean, there was one where an officer literally said, I don't have time for this shit, and just shot this kid who was having a breakdown. So, parents call, my kid's having a breakdown, I need help, and the police response is to arrive and kill their child. And this is, I try to stick to the Michael Brooks axiom, the great quote, be kind to people, ruthless with systems. And on an individual basis, I think it's terrible what happened to the police officer in San Luis Obispo. I think we should refrain from blaming individuals. In some cases, it does. In many cases, it comes down to individual decisions. I think Derek Chauvin should be found guilty. I think all those officers, who were standing there should be charged with aiding and abetting. But at the same time, we have to recognize the system, and we have to recognize what is constructed in our society and what is not constructed, what the lack of care and the lack of systemic intervention that all these other steps that could have been taken beforehand in these people's lives.